Racist cop tries to rob posh black girl, her call lands cop in jail for 28 years. Amara was driving home late in the evening, her favorite soft music playing in the background as the city lights blurred outside her car window. She had just attended a business dinner at a well-known restaurant, a place where professionals gathered to talk about new opportunities. Dressed neatly in a tailored outfit and with her laptop bag on the passenger seat, she felt proud of how far she had come in life. She had studied hard, worked even harder, and earned a respectable place in the corporate world. For her, living in a quiet, wealthy neighborhood was not a privilege handed down, but something she had built step by step with determination and long hours of sacrifice. The night felt calm as her car rolled smoothly down the empty streets. But as she turned a corner not far from her home, she noticed flashing red and blue lights in her rearview mirror. At first, she thought maybe the police car was on its way to some emergency, but within seconds, she realized the lights were directed at her. She gently pulled her car over to the side, her heart beating a little faster than before. She had done nothing wrong, but she knew how unpredictable late-night police stops could sometimes be. Amara lowered her window halfway and kept both hands on the steering wheel, just as she had been taught to do for safety. A tall man in uniform stepped out of the patrol car and walked toward her. His name was Officer Grant, though she didn't know it yet. His steps were slow, almost dragging, and his eyes seemed to scan her car not as a routine check, but as if he was already suspicious of her presence. "License and registration," he said flatly when he reached her window. His tone wasn't professional, it was sharp and carried an edge of judgment. Amara nodded politely and reached for her purse, where she had neatly kept all her documents. As she handed them over, she noticed the way he glanced at her expensive handbag and then at the jewelry on her wrist. His eyes lingered not on the papers but on her appearance, as though her polished image somehow unsettled him. "You live around here?" he asked, not even looking at the license yet. "Yes, officer," Amara replied calmly, pointing toward the direction of her neighborhood. "Just a few blocks down." He tilted his head and smirked slightly, as if he didn't believe her. "Uh-huh. And what brings you driving through this area tonight?" She felt the question was unusual. She was heading home, which was obvious, yet the way he asked it made it sound like she didn't belong there. "I was coming from a business dinner downtown," she explained politely. His eyes narrowed, and he leaned a little closer to her window. "Business dinner, huh? Must be nice." The way he said it wasn't out of admiration but with a hint of sarcasm. "People like you don't usually live here. This is a pretty high-end neighborhood." Amara's heart skipped a beat. She kept her composure but could sense that this was not a normal traffic stop. Instead of checking her documents, he seemed more interested in questioning her very presence, as though wealth or success were not something he thought she should have. The silence between them grew heavy for a moment. The officer looked over her car's interior with slow, deliberate eyes, pausing on her laptop bag and designer purse. "You drive a nice car," he commented, his voice low but sharp. "Not the kind I usually see people like you in." Amara felt a mix of emotions: unease, confusion, and frustration, but she knew arguing would only make things worse. She smiled politely, trying to remain calm. "Thank you, officer. Is there a problem with my driving?" Instead of answering, he tapped her license against the side of the car window and muttered, "You sure this is your address?" "Yes," she replied, her voice steady but firm. "That's my home." He gave a small chuckle that didn't feel friendly. "We'll see about that." Minutes passed as he held her documents but made no attempt to run them through his car system. Instead, he kept circling the same kind of questions, all of which implied that she didn't belong where she lived, that her appearance and possessions didn't match the story she was telling. To Amara, it was clear this wasn't about a traffic violation at all. It was about suspicion rooted in something deeper, something unfair. She took a slow breath, reminding herself that she needed to stay calm. Her phone rested quietly on the seat beside her, and for a moment, she considered picking it up. But she decided against it for now. Sudden moves could easily be misunderstood. The officer leaned a little closer again, lowering his voice. "Tell me something, Amara," he said, reading her name off the license. "How exactly did you afford all this? The car, the bag, the neighborhood. Must have some story, right?" Amara's pulse raced. She knew it was inappropriate for him to ask such things. But she also knew she had to tread carefully. "I worked hard, officer," she replied, her voice steady. "I have a career I'm proud of." He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with a faint smirk, he said, "Well, isn't that something?" The silence that followed felt even heavier. The street around them was quiet, with no other cars passing by, just the hum of the patrol car's engine and the faint chirping of crickets in the distance. Amara tightened her grip on the steering wheel, wishing the encounter would end soon. She had been stopped before for routine checks, but this one felt different, more personal, more intrusive. She glanced at the clock on her dashboard. It had already been nearly 10 minutes since he pulled her over, yet he hadn't returned to his car to verify anything. Instead, he seemed to be stalling, watching her, looking for something he could twist into suspicion. Inside, Amara reminded herself of her own strength. She had faced challenges before, classrooms where she wasn't expected to succeed, workplaces where she had to prove her worth twice as much as others. She wasn't going to let one person's attitude shake the foundation of who she was. Still, she couldn't ignore the unease that grew stronger with every passing second. Her instincts told her that this officer wasn't going to let her go easily, not without pushing some kind of boundary. She stayed polite, calm, and respectful, but in the back of her mind, she began to prepare for what she might need to do if the situation turned more serious. As the officer finally stepped back slightly, still holding onto her license, he looked at her with a mixture of doubt and something she couldn't quite read. "Stay right here," he said, though he still didn't move toward his car. Instead, he lingered, his eyes once again drifting over her belongings as if weighing a decision. Amara took another slow breath. She knew this night was far from over. The minutes kept ticking by, and Amara noticed that Officer Grant was not acting the way a normal officer would during a routine traffic stop. Usually, an officer would check documents quickly, run them through the system, and then either let the driver go or explain the issue. But here, nothing of that sort was happening. Instead, Grant seemed more interested in her personal belongings and in questioning her presence than in carrying out his actual duty. He tapped her license against his palm, looking down at it and then back at her face. "You know," he said slowly, "a lot of people try to pass through this neighborhood pretending they belong here. You'd be surprised how often I run into that." Amara kept her voice even. "I really do live here, officer. I've been a resident for over 2 years. Grant gave a little laugh that didn't sound friendly. "Over 2 years, huh? Must have been some kind of stroke of luck to land a house here. Not many can pull that off." His tone made it clear he didn't believe her. She wanted to explain that her home wasn't luck but the result of long years of effort and commitment. But she also knew that no matter how carefully she explained, he wasn't interested in her truth. His questions weren't about facts, they were about undermining her presence, about making her feel she didn't belong. Finally, instead of returning to his car to verify her documents, he leaned a little closer. "Go ahead and hand me that purse," he said casually, as though it were a normal request. His eyes stayed fixed on the expensive bag resting on the passenger seat. Amara blinked, surprised. "Excuse me," she asked softly, making sure she had heard him right. "That purse," he repeated, pointing at it. "Let me take a look." "Routine inspection." Her heart skipped a beat. She knew there was no reason for him to inspect her bag, especially not in the middle of a traffic stop with no stated violation. But she also knew she had to be very careful. "Officer, I don't understand," she said politely. "I have my license and registration right here. Is there something wrong with my driving?" He narrowed his eyes, his lips pressing into a thin line. "You heard me. Hand it over." Amara's instincts screamed that this was no longer about law enforcement. This was about intimidation, about pushing her into a corner. She kept her hands firmly on the steering wheel, not making any sudden moves. "With all respect, officer, may I ask why?" Grant leaned closer, lowering his voice in a way that made her uneasy. "Because I said so. And unless you want me to find a reason to keep you here longer, you'll cooperate." The words sank in slowly. He wasn't hiding his intentions anymore. He was using his badge not to protect or serve, but to pressure her. Amara's mind raced. She thought about the stories she had read, the warnings her parents had always given her about staying calm and composed during such encounters. But this was not a typical situation. This officer was deliberately stepping beyond his duty. For a moment, she thought about simply handing him the purse to avoid trouble. But deep down, she knew that if she gave in now, there would be no limit to what else he might try. He was testing how far he could go. She kept her voice gentle but firm. "Officer, I don't feel comfortable giving you my personal belongings. I've given you everything required for a traffic stop already." His expression darkened slightly, as though he wasn't used to being questioned. He tapped her license against the window again and said, "You think anyone's going to believe you over me? I can write up a dozen reasons to keep you here. So, you can make this easy or you can make it hard." Amara felt her chest tighten, but she reminded herself to stay calm. She shifted slightly, enough to glance at her phone resting beside her. Quietly, without making it obvious, she slid her hand toward it. She didn't unlock it yet, but she kept it close, just in case. Grant seemed to notice her movement. "What are you doing?" he asked sharply. "Just keeping my phone near me," she replied evenly, refusing to let fear show in her voice. "I always keep it close when I'm stopped. For safety." He gave a short, cold laugh. "Safety," he repeated, shaking his head. "You don't need to worry about safety. I'm the law here." The words echoed in her mind, making her realize more clearly than ever what he was trying to do. He wanted to use his authority as a shield, assuming she wouldn't dare resist. He stepped back a little, circling her car slowly as if looking for another excuse. His flashlight beam brushed across her back seat, then returned to her face. "You sure this car is yours?" he asked. "Yes, officer. It's registered in my name," she replied calmly. "Then hand me the keys for a moment," he said suddenly. Amara tightened her grip on the steering wheel. She knew there was no valid reason for him to take her keys. "I'd prefer to keep them with me," she said cautiously. His expression hardened again. "Listen," he said, his tone dropping lower, "I can make one phone call and have you spending the night explaining yourself downtown. Is that what you want?" Her heart pounded, but her mind stayed clear. She understood that he was bluffing, relying on fear to control her. She also understood that this was a dangerous moment. She had to balance firmness with caution. She glanced toward the quiet street around her. Still no cars passing, still no one nearby. Inside, she thought of her parents' voices, reminding her always to stay smart, always to protect herself. She thought of the years she had spent building her life, proving herself in spaces where she wasn't always welcomed. And now, sitting in her car with the night pressing in, she realized this was one of those moments where her calm strength was the only shield she had. Instead of arguing, she said quietly, "Officer, I respect the law. I respect your position. But I know my rights. And I've done nothing wrong tonight. Her words hung in the air. For the first time, Grant seemed caught off guard. He stared at her for a long moment, his jaw tight, as if debating what to do next. He still held her license, but he no longer looked like he was following procedure. He looked like a man whose plan wasn't going the way he wanted. The silence stretched on, broken only by the distant sound of a car horn somewhere far away. Amara's phone rested close to her hand now, and she knew she might need to use it soon. She had a growing sense that the situation wasn't going to resolve itself with patience alone. Grant finally leaned closer again, his voice sharper this time. "Don't play smart with me. You think that fancy job of yours, that house of yours, is going to protect you? Out here, it's just me and you." Amara stayed still, her heartbeat quick but her voice calm. "Then I trust you'll act fairly, officer," she said softly. Her words weren't just a statement, they were a reminder. A reminder that she wasn't going to be intimidated into giving up what was right. And as she looked him in the eye, she quietly made a decision. The next move she made might decide everything. Amara's fingers rested gently on her phone, her heart beating faster with every second. She could feel the pressure of the moment pressing down on her, but she refused to let it cloud her judgment. Officer Grant was still circling her car slowly, his flashlight beam darting across the windows like he was searching for an excuse to justify what he was doing. Deep inside, Amara knew that if she didn't act carefully now, the situation could spiral into something far worse. She thought quickly. Calling for help too obviously might provoke him, but doing nothing at all would leave her completely at his mercy. She remembered something she had once read about how a person in danger could quietly dial emergency services and keep the line open, letting the dispatchers listen to everything. That idea stayed with her now, giving her a small measure of hope. With slow, careful movements, she unlocked her phone under the steering wheel, making sure not to draw attention. The bright glow of the screen was shielded by her bag, so it wasn't easily visible from outside. Her breath was steady, though her heart raced. She scrolled quickly to the emergency dial option and pressed it, sliding her phone discreetly into her lap while keeping her voice calm as if nothing unusual was happening. The ringing barely lasted a second before the call connected. She adjusted her posture slightly, pretending to shift in her seat so she could position the microphone closer. Then, in a quiet but clear tone, she spoke as though addressing Officer Grant. "My name is Amara Daniels," she said, her voice steady but soft. "I live on Willow Creek Drive, just a few blocks down. I've given you my license and registration. I don't understand why I'm being held here." Her words seemed like part of the conversation, but in truth, she was giving crucial information to the emergency line. The dispatcher on the other end, trained to recognize distress in coded speech, would pick up on her location and her name. Officer Grant narrowed his eyes, perhaps noticing the way she spoke so deliberately, but he didn't seem to realize she was communicating with someone beyond him. He smirked slightly. "You'll understand soon enough," he said vaguely, as if trying to keep her on edge. Amara felt a mix of fear and courage swelling inside her. She continued to speak carefully, making sure every sentence sounded natural but also provided details. "It's very late now, and I'd really like to get home safely. I live alone, and it's dark on this road. If anything were to happen, no one would see it." The dispatcher on the other end was surely taking notes, recording the call, and possibly signaling for backup officers to be sent to her location. Amara's quiet words, framed as part of the conversation, were creating a lifeline between her and safety. Grant stepped closer again, placing her license on the roof of her car as if to free his hands. "Look," he said, lowering his voice, "we can make this simple. Hand over what I asked for, and I'll let you go. Otherwise, we'll be here all night." Amara's stomach turned at his words, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she kept her breathing even and replied in the same calm tone she had been using, careful to continue feeding the dispatcher information. Officer, I'm not refusing to cooperate. I've done everything required of me. But I will not give away what is mine without proper reason. I hope that someone in authority will understand that I've been sitting here for nearly 20 minutes now without being told why I was stopped. Her words carried a message both to him and to the ears listening silently on the phone line. The dispatcher now had the timeline, her refusal to hand over personal property, and the fact that she had been detained without explanation. Grant leaned down to her window again, his expression harder than before. "You think you're clever, don't you?" he said, his tone carrying irritation. "People like you always think you can outsmart the system. But let me tell you something, you're not going anywhere until I say so." Amara met his gaze, her face calm though her pulse raced beneath the surface. "Then I will wait," she replied softly, her words measured. "But I trust someone will review how this is being handled." For the first time, Grant seemed slightly unsettled. He stepped back, muttering something under his breath, and walked a few steps toward his patrol car. His movements were restless, as though he wasn't sure what his next action should be. Amara used the brief moment to continue speaking quietly, knowing the dispatcher was still listening. "I'm on Maple Street right now, close to the corner of Willow Creek Drive. It's just me and one officer. He hasn't told me the reason for the stop. I'm frightened, but I'm staying calm. If anyone can hear this, please send help." Her voice trembled slightly at the end, but she quickly steadied herself again, adjusting her tone to remain polite. Grant glanced back at her, but she smiled faintly as if she had only been speaking to him. The seconds dragged into minutes, and Amara prayed silently that help was on the way. She thought about her family, about how worried they would be if they knew what was happening right now. She thought about her younger sister, who always looked up to her, and promised herself silently that she would not let fear control her tonight. Grant returned to her car window after pacing near his patrol car. "All right," he said, his voice sharp again, "last chance. You hand it over, or I'll make sure this night goes badly for you." Amara stayed perfectly composed. She adjusted her phone slightly, making sure it stayed on, and spoke once more with courage that came from somewhere deep inside her. "Officer, I respect your position, but I know this isn't right. I will not give you what you're asking for. And if anything happens to me tonight, the truth will come out." Her words struck him differently this time. His jaw tightened, and his eyes darted to her phone for a split second, as if he suddenly realized she might not be as powerless as he thought. But before he could act, faint sirens in the distance broke the silence of the street. Amara's heart leapt. Relief mixed with anxiety, backup was arriving. Grant's head snapped up, and for the first time, his confident demeanor wavered. The sound of approaching vehicles grew louder, their lights soon flickering down the road. Amara kept her eyes forward, her face calm, but inside she was trembling with gratitude. Her quiet call had worked. Help was coming, and the situation was about to change. She whispered softly into her lap, words that the dispatcher would hear clearly, "Thank you. Please hurry." And as the flashing lights drew closer, she knew this long night was finally about to shift in her favor. The distant sirens grew louder with every passing second, echoing down the quiet street like a promise of relief. Amara's heart beat quickly, but for the first time since the stop began, she felt a spark of safety. Help was coming. She held her phone close, the call still connected, and whispered quietly, "They're here." The dispatcher on the other end would know her words meant everything was unfolding just as it should. Officer Grant, however, was not so calm. His confident expression wavered as the flashing red and blue lights appeared down the road, reflecting off the dark windows of Amara's car. He straightened his posture, adjusted his belt, and forced a look of authority back onto his face. But the unease in his eyes betrayed him. He hadn't expected backup. He hadn't expected his actions to be witnessed. Two patrol cars pulled up behind his, their headlights cutting across the street. Amara exhaled slowly, her hands still gripping the steering wheel tightly. She could see silhouettes of two officers stepping out, their radios crackling faintly as they approached. The atmosphere shifted immediately. The quiet tension of one officer intimidating her was replaced by the strong presence of others who might finally see the truth. "Evening, Grant," one of the officers called out as he walked closer. His voice was professional, steady. "We got a call from dispatch about this stop. Everything all right here?" Grant turned quickly, his hand resting on his hip as if trying to appear casual. "Yeah, everything's fine," he said, his tone carrying forced ease. "Just handling a situation. Routine." But Amara knew this wasn't routine, and so did the officers who had been listening to her quiet call. She could see the way they glanced at her car, their eyes searching for any sign of distress. Amara, seizing the opportunity, leaned slightly toward her open window and spoke clearly, making sure her words carried to the new arrivals. "Officers," she said politely, "thank you for coming. I've been here for over 20 minutes. I've given all my documents, but I haven't been told why I was stopped. I also feel uncomfortable because I was asked for my personal belongings without explanation." Her voice was calm but steady, carrying the truth with courage. The two new officers exchanged quick glances, their expressions tightening. One of them stepped closer to her window. "Ma'am, are you okay? Do you feel unsafe right now?" Amara nodded slightly. "Yes, I do," she said firmly, though respectfully. "That's why I kept the line open to dispatch." The air grew heavier. Grant's jaw tightened as he realized what she had done. The dispatcher hadn't just sent backup, they had heard everything, from the moment he started demanding her purse to his threats about keeping her there all night. His control of the situation was slipping through his fingers, and now the truth was standing right in front of him. "Grant," one of the officers said, his tone shifting from polite to firm, "we need to see your report of this stop. What's the probable cause?" Grant hesitated, his eyes darting between Amara and the other officers. "She was driving suspiciously," he said quickly. "Didn't look like she belonged here. I was just making sure everything checked out." "Driving suspiciously," the officer repeated, raising an eyebrow. "You've had her here for 20 minutes, and you haven't run her license yet." Grant shifted uncomfortably, trying to maintain his composure. "I was about to." But the second officer shook his head slightly, already doubtful. "That's not how it looks from here. Dispatch heard her state her name, her location, and explain that you asked for her belongings. We've got a live recording of this stop." Amara felt her chest lighten. The very words she had spoken in calm code to the dispatcher were now being used as evidence, proof that she hadn't been imagining what was happening. She stayed silent for now, allowing the officers to handle it, but her eyes spoke volumes. Grant's voice grew sharper. "You don't understand." She was being uncooperative. "I had reason to." Before he could finish, Amara raised her phone slightly. "I also have a recording," she said gently. "I started filming when the conversation turned uncomfortable. It's all right here." She placed her phone on the dashboard, where the small red light blinked steadily, showing it had been recording video the entire time. The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the faint hum of car engines. The new officers looked at Grant, their expressions stern. He shifted on his feet, his confidence now replaced by visible unease. He had relied on intimidation, on the assumption that no one would believe her word against his. But now, he faced not only witnesses, but evidence both from her phone and the dispatch recording. "Grant," the officer nearest to him said firmly, "step back from the vehicle." Grant hesitated, his hands tightening at his sides. "You're making a mistake," he muttered. "No," the officer replied, his voice like steel. "You made the mistake." Amara sat silently, her hands still on the wheel, her breathing calm. She watched as Grant was asked to move aside, his posture stiff, his face pale in the flashing lights. The second officer approached her window again, his voice gentler now. "Ma'am, thank you for staying calm. You did the right thing by calling dispatch. We'll make sure this is handled properly." Amara nodded, her lips pressing together as relief finally began to sink in. "Thank you," she whispered. The other officers began speaking into their radios, reporting the situation. More vehicles arrived within minutes, the quiet street now filled with flashing lights. Neighbors peered from behind curtains, curious about the unusual commotion in their normally peaceful community. As additional supervisors stepped out, the evidence was gathered quickly. Amara handed over her phone recording, which clearly captured Grant's demands and his attempts to pressure her. The dispatcher's live recording of the call was also replayed, confirming her version of events word for word. Grant tried to defend himself, insisting she had misunderstood, insisting his words were taken out of context. But the more he spoke, the weaker his excuses sounded. The officers listening to the evidence shook their heads, their patience thin. "Grant," one of the supervisors said firmly, "you've crossed the line. You're under investigation effective immediately." Though they didn't handcuff him right in front of Amara yet, the message was clear. His authority had crumbled, and his own colleagues were no longer standing by his side. For Amara, the moment was overwhelming. She had walked into this encounter alone, uncertain of how it would end. But through her calm courage and her clever actions, she had not only protected herself but also exposed something that might have otherwise gone unseen. As she sat in her car, finally allowed to breathe freely, she realized that this was more than just about her. It was about every person who had ever been made to feel small, powerless, or unworthy of fairness. Tonight, she had refused to let fear silence her, and now the truth was shining under the flashing lights for all to see. One of the officers returned her documents with a kind nod. "You're free to go home now, ma'am. We'll be in touch soon regarding your statement. What you did tonight was brave. Don't ever doubt that." Amara thanked him softly, her voice steady but filled with emotion. She started her car, glancing in the mirror at the scene behind her, officers gathering evidence, Grant standing stiffly with his head lowered, and the community quietly witnessing the truth unfold. As she drove the last few blocks to her home, she felt the weight of the night lift slightly. She knew the journey wasn't over. There would be questions, hearings, maybe even a trial. But for the first time since the flashing lights had appeared behind her, she felt a deep sense of peace. Justice had taken its first step forward, and she had been the one to light the way. The weeks that followed the incident were tense for Amara, though she carried herself with calm determination. Once the immediate danger had passed, the next challenge was ensuring that Officer Grant faced accountability for his actions. The news of the arrest had spread quickly in the neighborhood, drawing attention from local media and community members who had long suspected misconduct but lacked proof. Amara remained composed, knowing that her role now was to provide the truth in a clear and honest manner. When the trial was announced, she prepared meticulously. She met with lawyers, practiced recounting the events, and made sure every detail from the initial traffic stop to the 911 call and her video recording was precise and accurate. Each time she spoke of the incident, she focused on the facts, maintaining a calm tone that highlighted her honesty and bravery. She knew the courtroom could be intimidating, but she reminded herself that her purpose was not only personal justice, but also accountability for someone who had abused his authority. The day of the trial arrived, and the courtroom was filled with a mixture of curious neighbors, media representatives, and legal professionals. Officer Grant sat at the defendant's table, his posture stiff and his expression guarded. Across the room, Amara's family offered quiet support, holding her hand and giving her strength. She felt a mixture of nerves and resolve, knowing that this was the moment where the truth would finally be presented in full view. When Amara was called to testify, she stepped forward with confidence. Her voice, steady and clear, described the entire sequence of events: the late-night drive, the abrupt traffic stop, the officer's intimidating behavior, and the exact moment she realized she needed to call for help. She spoke carefully, emphasizing how she had remained calm despite the fear she felt and how she had strategically recorded the encounter to ensure her safety. The defense tried to cast doubt on her account, suggesting that she may have misinterpreted the officer's intentions or exaggerated the situation. But Amara remained unshaken. She calmly explained the specifics, citing times, words, and actions, and referenced the video recording as evidence. The courtroom watched intently as the footage was played, showing Officer Grant's behavior exactly as she had described it. The jury listened closely. They saw the repeated attempts by Grant to pressure her into giving up her personal belongings and his dismissive and confrontational manner. They heard the 911 dispatcher's voice on the live call, which confirmed that Amara had calmly and clearly described the unfolding situation. Every detail corroborated her story. Other witnesses were also called. A neighbor who had noticed the police cars outside and observed part of the interaction confirmed that Amara had remained composed, and that Grant's demeanor seemed unusually harsh. Officers who had responded to the backup call described how they had immediately recognized that the situation had escalated beyond a routine stop, and how the evidence collected on site clearly supported Amara's account. The defense attempted to question her credibility, but it was evident that she had acted with intelligence, patience, and courage. Her careful attention to detail, her strategic thinking, and her composure under pressure made her testimony compelling. The jury began to grasp the magnitude of the misconduct and the bravery it had taken for Amara to stand her ground. After several days of testimonies, presentations, and deliberations, the jury reached a verdict. The courtroom was silent as the foreperson stood and announced the decision: Officer Grant was found guilty of attempted robbery, abuse of authority, and civil rights violations. A collective sigh of relief swept through the room. For Amara, it was a moment of vindication, a confirmation that standing firm in the face of intimidation had been the right choice. The sentencing phase followed. The judge emphasized the seriousness of the crimes, particularly the breach of trust by someone sworn to uphold the law. He noted how Officer Grant had used his authority to threaten and intimidate an innocent citizen, and how Amara's bravery had ensured that justice could be served. In light of the evidence and the severity of the misconduct, the judge sentenced Officer Grant to 28 years in prison. The sentence sent a strong message not only to him, but to others who might think they could misuse their power without consequence. For the community, it was a moment of reassurance that justice could prevail when truth and courage were combined. Amara left the courtroom feeling a sense of calm pride. She knew the journey had been far from easy, but she also understood that her actions had made a difference. Her courage had not only protected herself but had highlighted the importance of accountability and fairness in a system meant to protect everyone equally. In the days and months that followed, Amara became a quiet inspiration in her community. She gave interviews to local news outlets, always focusing on the principles that guided her actions: composure, intelligence, and standing up for what is right. She emphasized that anyone, regardless of background or circumstance, could act bravely when faced with unfair treatment. Her story encouraged others to know their rights, to remain calm under pressure, and to seek help when necessary. Her experience also sparked discussions about police conduct and the importance of accountability. Local organizations used her story to promote training, awareness, and reforms aimed at preventing abuse of authority. Amara never sought the spotlight, but her voice and her actions became a catalyst for change. Despite the attention, she continued her daily life with grace and quiet determination. She returned to work, maintained her routines, and invested in her personal growth, all while using her experience to mentor others about courage, resilience, and standing firm in the face of intimidation. Her family remained proud and supportive, sharing the joy of seeing justice served. They celebrated her bravery not with fanfare, but with quiet acknowledgement of the strength it took to face such a challenging situation. Amara's friends and colleagues were inspired by her ability to remain calm, strategic, and composed, proving that intelligence and courage often come hand in hand. Years later, people still remembered the story of how a young woman's quick thinking and courage had led to the conviction of an officer who tried to misuse his power. Amara had not only defended her own rights, but had also made a lasting impact on the community, demonstrating that standing up for justice is always worth the risk. Even though the night of the traffic stop had begun with fear and uncertainty, it ended with clarity, empowerment, and triumph. Amara's story remained a testament to the strength of an individual who refused to be intimidated, and to the power of truth when it is paired with courage. In the end, justice prevailed, and a message was sent loud and clear: no one is above the law, and standing up for what is right can inspire change far beyond a single moment. Amara never sought fame from the ordeal, but she became a symbol of hope, demonstrating that intelligence, bravery, and integrity could overcome intimidation. She continued to live her life fully, always mindful that courage sometimes comes in quiet, calculated actions, and that the choices we make in challenging moments define our character.